Hello, everyone. Thank you once again for tuning into the And When You're All podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, and today we're going to talk about the $39 trillion problem and counting. So, what is that exactly? That is the U.S. national debt. I have some note here, as you can usually see, just a little sneak peek as we usually do. Today we're going to talk about the national debt of the United States and some things that we can do about it and the things that are making it worse. So first and foremost, what is the debt? The U.S. national debt is basically when the United States Congress, which is in charge of delineations of spending and in charge of the federal budget, they don't have enough money from taxes or from other means of generating money from the federal government. They can't pay for what they need to, so we go into debt for that. Those things could be like the military, or they could be like emergency spending or disaster relief. They could be anything in the federal budget that needs to be paid for. Usually we don't have all the money when it comes time to pay for it, so we borrow. And there's a couple different ways that we've done that, and we've done this for a very, very long time. Basically, since the inception of the United States, we've borrowed. There's been a couple times we've gotten ourselves out of debt completely, or we've done pretty well with that. But the problem arises, and the reason I'm making this video for you guys today is because this is a more, I could say, modern day problem. Within the past 30 to 50 years, we've had a significant increase in the amount of money presidents were willing to issue for the debt, basically. Whatever bill came across their desk, if it was, including trillions of dollars in spending, and we'll go over each individual president. The past 6 presidents have been perfectly fine with passing whatever bill, whatever amount of debt is necessary, they feel. So who do we owe all of this money to? A lot of people, when they hear about the national debt, they think, if we owe this money to whoever, maybe we can do something about it before we have to pay it back. That's the problem. We can't just declare war on a country because they have our debt, or because, we have too much debt to them. It doesn't quite work like that. Only about 19% of debt is called intragovernmental debt, which means other governments, other countries, or the United States itself owns this debt. And about 81%, and this is from the U.S. Treasury Department, 19% of debt is intragovernmental, and 81% is domestic. So most of the debt we owe to ourselves, basically, domestic investors, and I'll get into exactly how that works. But what presidents added what? So for going back in time, they don't have all the information for Donald Trump's second term. He's only about a year and a half into his second term now. So we only have his first term, but I believe he's put up at least 1.2 trillion from the big beautiful bill. Was that the spending bill? It was 1.2 trillion. I'm sure it's been more than that, but we're not worried about that exactly today. We're worried about the presidents that have already came and went. So they're not able to add any more debt, at least for the first term here. So for Joe Biden, it was $8.4 trillion in his first term. In 4 years under Joe Biden's administration, he authorized Congress to add $8.4 trillion to the national deficit. To the national debt. That's a lot, considering that the U.S. national debt is only $39 trillion. You basically put, I should have done the math, but what's that, about 5% of it? If it's about $8 trillion and it's almost $40 trillion, that's about 5% of the debt in one term. That's kind of a lot. Donald Trump's first term, right before that, was $7.8 trillion added to the debt. Before that was Obama with $7.6 trillion. Before that was George W. Bush with $4.2 trillion. We did have the war with Iraq and Afghanistan as well, so things could have been a little bit different comparatively. But as you can see, things have definitely gotten out of hand, and the trend is trending up significantly so. For Bill Clinton, mind you, Obama and Bush were both 2-term presidents, so they put up the numbers that they had. But Bill Clinton, he actually had a balanced budget for one of the years. He tried very, very hard to cut costs, and he only put up $1.2 trillion by the end of his presidency in 2001, I believe. And before that was H.W. Bush, and he put $1.2 trillion as well. And that's added to inflation for today. So these numbers are not precisely what they accepted as U.S. debt, but to today's numbers, that's what it is. So 1.2 trillion from H.W. Bush. That's not actually how much he put up at the time, but in today's numbers, that's what it is. So why is this all relevant? Well, because the United States is going on what is called, from the Federal Chair Jerome Powell says,
what's clear is that our debt is growing much faster. The federal government debt is growing substantially faster than our economy, and that ratio is going up. And in the long run, that's kind of the definition of unsustainable. The level of the debt is not unsustainable, but the path is not sustainable.
Basically, we are taking on all this debt, and we have zero plans to pay any of it back. The only money we are spending on our debt every year is interest payments. We're making no principal payments. And if you're familiar with how debt works, I'll break it down for some of my viewers that haven't taken on debt in their life so far. Basically, you take money from somebody, they're going to charge you interest. They say, hey, here's $100. I'm going to charge you 20% interest, and I expect to get paid back in a month. Okay, so in 1 month, I have to give you $120 because you lended out $100 at a 20% interest rate. Makes sense, right? So the problem is, if you come back in a month and you say, hey, I got your $20 for you for the interest, and they say, okay, where's the rest of it? You say, oh, well, I don't have the rest. I'm only able to pay interest. They could say, okay, I'll give you another month to pay, but it's going to be 20% interest still. Okay. So then the next month you come back, you say, hey, I still don't have that $100, but I have another $20 for interest. And they say, okay, we'll give you another month. And that's basically what happens. But you do that 5 months in a row, you paid $100 in interest when you could have just paid off the $100 to begin with. If we're only paying off the interest, we are making no significant dent or of payment towards the actual national debt. It's growing every year. We are taking on more debt than we can ever pay off every single year. And now debt payment is one of the highest ticket items on the federal budget every single year. So what happens if a country can't pay their debt? This is what's important. We're taking on all this debt. We have almost $40 trillion in debt. What happens if it gets so much that countries say, well, I don't think you're going to pay back your debt? Or when people buy treasury bonds, which is what we'll get into in a second, which basically how is debt created? I'll give you a little bit of a background. There's things called bills, notes, and bonds. If you've heard of bonds, stocks and bonds, maybe you've learned about that in high school. Bills, notes, and bonds. A bill is a 1 year, less than 1 year to 1 year it takes for that to mature. Basically, the Treasury Department will sell these bills, notes, and bonds to investors, mostly domestic investors. That's that 81%. They buy them. Say, I'm selling $1,000 bond, and I'm only going to sell it for $900. And it'll take, say, 20 years for it to, I forget the exact, to mature. That's the word, to mature. And so basically you can say, hey, we get $1,000. Or sorry, we get $900, and we're promising that in the future it'll be worth more. So it's a way for people to basically invest and also hedge against inflation. So that's why people, if they invest in bonds, that's how they do it. They buy it directly from the treasury of the government, and in a few years, depending on if it's a bill, note, or bond, that's how long it takes to mature. So that's how the government makes money. But that's how the interest is created, because, okay, I give you $100, and I sell something for $100, but it's really, I'm making this up wrongly. I sell something that is worth $100, but I only sell it for $80. And there's that 20% interest. And I say, okay, you can expect in a year's time that you will make that 20% interest. We will pay that back. So that means in a year's time, if that person says, hey, this is matured, I'd like to cash it in, you could say, okay, you've made 20%. And you give that money to them because it was helpful at the time for that government to get that money when they needed it. The government needed money, so they issued a bond, bill, or note. And in the future, they had to pay that back. That's the interest. So that makes sense, right? Hopefully everybody's followed along, and I've explained it well enough for everybody to understand. So what is a default? A default is when a country cannot pay its debts. It is not able to pay out its interest or on any outstanding loans that it has, or it cannot pay for its social programs. It's basically not able to pay for any. It doesn't have enough money, and it can no longer take on debt to provide the money that it needs. So what happens when a country defaults? Basically, it could lead to many, many different things. One of them immediately is the credit rating. What the credit rating is something I should explain first. But if a country gets too far deep into its debt and it does not seem like it's going to pay it back, there's 3 institutions that monitor if they're able to pay that back, and that is Moody's, S&P, and Fitch. And basically what they do is they will rate it between AAA, which is the best, to D, which stands for default. It goes AAA, BBB, BB, and D. So there's 4 ratings. I'm looking. I have this up on my computer right behind the phone here today. I also have it written down. But either way, so why that matters is that the United States used to have a AAA rating, but then a couple years ago, we actually got downgraded because of the national debt. GDP to debt ratio is something that contributes to that evaluation of how well the credit standing is for a country. And the United States' debt is now, like I said, $39 trillion. Our GDP is only about $33 trillion. So our debt exceeds how much money our country can make in a year. But that's everything. That's GDP. That's everything the country can make in a year. So if we're making, let me check exactly. I have where are we? I think it's, sorry, a little bit behind the scenes work here. Here we go. This is the USDebtClock.org. Let's see. Gross domestic product right now, it tracks as 31.3 trillion. And the national debt is 39.1 trillion. So that exceeds our GDP for the year. All right. And that's a problem. So that's why we got our credit rating downgraded, which means it's harder to borrow. Interest rates are going to be higher. It's not intensely hard. It's not like we have to really change so much. It just means the interest rates are going to be higher if we want to take on any debt from institutions, or if we want to go to banks and say, hey, buy our treasuries. They're going to say, well, the treasury, it's not what it used to be. So that could be a problem. But the credit rating, what's that mean for a country? The sovereign credit rating, that's basically these three organizations that apply credit rating so that people know how interest rates should go for the borrowing. And then what is the deficit? The deficit is the shortfall between spending and a country's liquidity. And the liquidity is how much money they've generated from taxes or from anything that can make them money. So the United States collects taxes from its citizens, and then it uses those taxes to pay for the military, to pay for infrastructure, to pay for salaries in the government, to pay for everything. But when we don't have enough money, like I explained, we borrow. And so every country on the planet basically does this. They borrow, and every country has a deficit. Some countries have a surplus, which is a great thing to have, because that means that you have the ability to spend money on things. Like if America had this $1 trillion surplus all of a sudden and we didn't have to worry so much about our debt, we could easily pay for things like universal health care. And that's why this is a big problem, because when people say that they want things like universal health care, or they want things like better infrastructure or a change in their living standards or better a housing market or whatever it is, or if they want subsidies for certain industries, anything, the money has to come from somewhere. And if it's not coming from how much money is generated through tax revenue, then it has to come from spending through debt. And that's a dangerous thing. So a lot of countries, if they want that's why if you go to places like Europe and you say, oh, they have free healthcare, they have universal healthcare, universal childcare, that's because they have such high taxes. When their tax rate is over 40%, you go to Canada, their tax rate on income, some of it's up to 60%. You're making less than half of your paycheck at times, or, on exactly what comes out of there. It compensates, say, you don't have to pay for healthcare, you don't have to pay for childcare, but your take home is much, much less because their taxes are lower. And that's how that works. So I hope I explained that the best I can. I have three more points, and then we'll get into solutions. 4 more points. But this is basically what happens when a country can't borrow. So say a country defaults and a country is no longer able to borrow. That means that they have a very excruciating hard time paying for anything within their country. So say, for instance, if Germany, which does have universal health care, and I think they have free college too. So that means that if they're not able to pay for those things, they can't afford those things. And if they're not able to borrow because other countries won't allow them to, because they haven't paid back their debt in so long, they have no history or credibility to pay back their debt, nobody will buy their treasuries because they're going to be worthless. So that is the problem. You start to lose the benefits of living in your country, or the society that you've created for however many years starts to deteriorate because you can't uphold the things you've spent money on so far. So that's why Social Security is a problem. That's why Medicare is a problem. Medicaid is a problem. That's why when people want subsidies for certain industries, that's a really hard thing to maintain. And that's why problems arise with countries that don't have a good debt path or a good debt policy. So the worst part about this is the collapse of spending ability is the first thing that always hits. And what can that lead to? That can lead to a lot. But no money for social programs is usually the big one. If you don't have money for things like, like I've already explained, universal health care, that's going to take a big hit to your society. Here's the big one for the United States, and why this matters most of all. Invasion. The United States, if it could not upkeep its military, if it got too expensive and we had to start, we couldn't pay for it, we had to start shrinking our military because we didn't have the money for it, because we defaulted and we didn't have enough security in our financial institutions to be able to lend money out to us again as a country, we would basically get invaded. People would say, wow, I don't have to worry about the United States because they can't even pay for the things that they have anymore. And if that becomes a problem to where we can't even borrow money, you basically have to start the country over. That's what kind of happened in Germany in the 1920s and 30s. They experienced hyperinflation because they couldn't pay back their debts, and that's another problem as well. If your country's currency is not backed by a commodity like it was the gold standard in 1971, then your country can print money as much as it wants to. You can print money to pay off your debt. You can do that, but by printing the money, it becomes less valuable to pay off your debt. So that's saying, okay, maybe I owe this guy $100, or maybe I owe him $120, like the example from before with a 20% interest rate, but I'm going to print that $120. But by the time I print that $120, I've devalued the money because inflation, when you print money, it's worth less because it's less rare. It's less of a valuable commodity. There's more of it. You have 1 million grains of rice, it's going to be valuable. If you have 1 billion grains of rice and you don't need rice, it's not valuable. So obviously, hopefully I don't have to explain the very basis of if you print money, it will be less valuable. But say you print money, then you have to spend $130, and you've devalued your currency for the future payments just to be able to pay this one instance of interest or whatever payment you wanted to do. So that's a problem as well. But the United States military would 100% be, it's like the fourth biggest thing in the federal spending budget. We spend almost $1 trillion a year on our through the federal spending just on the military budget, and the current incumbent president Donald Trump wants it to be more. He wants $1.5 trillion next year. So that's outrageous in my opinion when we have such a colossal debt problem already. But here's the biggest problem of all. Borrowing always increases during war. Always, always, always. Every single time that Congress has declared war, borrowing has gone up. President Wilson, who was president during World War I, his borrowing increased 789.9% over the course of his presidency. That was for World War I. For FDR, it was just about the same. A 791.8% increase in borrowing during World War II, or during his presidency, but that was basically because of World War II. So imagine that we get into a crisis where the United States can't pay for its military as much, we can't borrow money, we're having a problem paying for social services or any type of social programs, we can't upkeep the subsidies that we have for certain industries that keep our economy moving, and on top of that, when we get into a war, we are expected to borrow even more. So you can see how this would not work for a country to decide that it doesn't want to pay its debt off, but it'll still continue to take on an irresponsible amount of debt every single fiscal year. So this becomes a problem that compounds over the course of years and is certainly what could lead to the downfall of a country, especially like the United States, which is currently the most powerful military and the most culturally significant country on the planet. And that's without the bias of being an American citizen. I know that. And we live with the luxury and privilege of that as well. Something we could easily lose if we do not instead try to do something about this problem. So what are some solutions? I have some solutions. First and foremost, I'll have to explain myself in a second, but elect leaders that won't borrow. Straight up, no borrowing. That is what is called a radically conservative economic policy. That is completely austerous, which you will not be taking on debt. No new borrowing. That is a very radical approach, but that is something we need because the way that I see it, if we continue to every president is adding more debt every time. If we keep along this path of irresponsible taking on of more debt, exponentially so, we will have a problem where in the next 10 to 15 years, the debt could maybe exceed 100 trillion. Easily. Possibly more. And if that happens, then I can't see any country, or we might, our credit rating might lessen even more. Interest rates can go even higher, and then all of a sudden that the interest rates that we are paying every single year, they explode. And now the biggest thing we're spending from the federal budget, our biggest ticket item, is the interest on the federal debt. And that's just not something we can afford. We can, but we're talking in trillions upon trillions of dollars. So that is basically what we need to do now. And I can't really see this gaining traction, unfortunately, for the next 5 to 10 years, and something really happening possibly in the next 15 years, where it's possibly already going to be too late. But in my humble opinion, if you want to elect anybody to take care of the debt into Congress, they need to be radically conservative. They don't need to be a conservative or a Republican, but they need to have the idea to be radically conservative and austerous about the debt. That is something that's very important. Something else that you could do for a solution is impose taxes set to pay the national debt. That could say we're implementing a tax on, it could be anything. You could say on bottle caps. Every bottle cap in the United States, there's going to be 10% of the cost of that bottle cap is going to go towards the national debt. That wouldn't really work because bottle caps are very inexpensive and there's not a lot of money to be taxing them, but that's basically something you could do. I have an idea I'll share in a little bit of what we could do to implement a tax that would help pay for the national debt, but that's wrapped up in another policy of mine. And then lastly would just be pass legislation that ensures yearly payments. It could be simple as that. You could say our baseline is going to be $200 billion. Every year we're going to pay $200 billion, or maybe $250 billion to the national debt, regardless of what it is. And then every year, depending on how much our GDP increased, say GDP from last year was a 5% increase, that means that half of that is going to go toward, half of that increase will be on the debt payment. So that means that $250 billion increases by 2.5%. So then say if you have a really bad year and GDP halves, it goes down by say 10%. Instead of saying, well, we'll still do half, we'll only decrease our debt payment by 5%, you still decrease by the full percent instead. So the reason for that is that you expect to be in good economic times more than bad economic times. There could be 2 or 3 years where you've actually decreased how much you're willing to pay towards the national debt, but it's actually been helpful because that money, it's like double payment. If it's say, well, we're decreasing how much we're paying to the national debt, and we also get to borrow more if we wanted to, but it's also, it gives you the ability to pay for other things that you need to because you lost that money through taxes because GDP was less. So you say, okay, we have less money, but we don't have to spend as much money, thankfully, now that we have less money from our GDP. But then you have a 0.5% every time it increases. So it might take 10 years for it to increase 20%, because every year it's a small amount. Say 10 years, it's a 2%, would be 1%. But the GDP, if it went up or went down, it would still, for the most part, go up, which means that you would pay more only if GDP went up, which is a good thing. It basically ensures that as long as the economy is good, we will pay for our debt. And if the economy is bad, we will pay less towards our debt, but in a way that is substantial enough to still make an impact. It's not like, oh, we're not paying our debt this year. It's not good. Something. We need to do something. So now finally we can get into John Holmberg's plan. And if you've watched my channel for any amount of time, you've probably heard me mention on a couple podcasts and in individual videos or on my shorts where I do Socks with John. Shout out to Socks with John. It is my plan as president in the year 2041. I hope to be elected as president. It would be the year 2040 for the 2040 election. I plan to start running in 2037 as an independent moderate. But I digress because the exact plan has been laid out in a future video. Let me tell you what I would do for the debt plan. And this is something very substantial. And if you agree with me, vote for me in 15 years. I could really use the help, believe me. First and foremost, if you haven't heard already, is my plan to implement asteroid mining as a new industry. I think we have the technology that exists today to be able to do it. It just takes a lot of investment, a lot of public perception, and a lot of sentiment and investment from Congress. So if a president came along and said we were going to give out these contracts for companies to go and bring asteroid material back to the United States for processing, and then we could sell it to the rest of the world, that would be a fantastic thing. The reason I say that would help for the national debt is because we would institute a space commerce tax. Anything that comes from outer space, whether it's from the moon, if you're mining things on the moon and sending them back to Earth, you're mining things in space. It allows basically for societies to be successful in space later on. And it also creates the precedent for how things should work between planets. Say if it's a planet, saying going from Mars to Earth, there's two civilizations there. There should be a taxable event somewhere along the lines, especially if we're using it to pay off the national debt. So there would be a space commerce tax. All companies that bring material from outer space to the United States, they would have to spend probably about a 5 to 10% tax on that, which is really not bad. That's like sales tax. I would have my policy is for a balanced budget every single year. I will be that radically conservative. I'm not a conservative. I have some conservative policies. This perhaps is my most conservative policy. Like I said, I'm a moderate. I pull from each side. I have very progressive policies. I have very conservative policies, and they mesh very well, and they overlap in ways that are beneficial. Because our country should, take the best of both sides. The reason they exist is probably for some reason, but if the Democrats and the Republicans on either side have had some idea that propels people to want to join their parties, if I take the best parts of each, I think I can enhance them in ways that are not detrimental to the public by saying, hey, join my party. I just say, hey, this is a good idea, vote for me. And if you agree with that, well, I'm not taking your soul and stuffing it into a Democrat box or stuffing it into a Republican box. So balanced budget for 8 years, hopefully 16. It's my idea that I will endorse my vice president to run after me for 8 years, but then his vice president I will not endorse. I've said this a couple times. I will only endorse my vice president to run if he solemnly swears to not endorse his vice president because I don't like the idea of political dynasties. I think ensuring that the 8 years of work that I had done as president is not undone by a president in the next 8 years, and that would also ensure that if we had 8 to 16 years of the similar policy, then we can count on things like 16 years of paying back debt, or ensuring at the very least that we've had some type of debt repayment option, or that we have taxes that are contributing, or that we're not borrowing for that time. So those would be the three things: a balanced budget, not borrowing, and asteroid mining and a space commerce tax, and that tax would go directly into paying the national debt. Another one of these things, obviously, like I've already mentioned, is no war. It is my policy is to not engage in senseless, useless wars. If the United States was attacked, obviously, as president and the commander-in-chief of our military, I would have to authorize retaliatory strikes and make sure that our people are safe. But I would not go looking for trouble. And it would be my policy. I know some languages. I know some Spanish. It is my my pride in life to learn more languages so that I can connect with more people and be understood and understand them. It is my plan to institute the North American Union as well, which is basically the idea of 23 countries in North America. I think they could all get together in some type of security and economic agreement. It could be mutually beneficial. We'll talk about that again in the future. But that would also help for a couple reasons. Just to touch on that very quickly, a North American Union would be a great idea because, one, the U.S. economy is large enough to sustain itself. However, if we integrated with countries in the in North America, there's a lot of stuff we can't do. We can't grow sugar here. We can't grow bananas in the United States. We can't grow coffee in the United States. There's other countries that can. And I think we should work with these countries so that we could have better opportunities for free trade, not necessarily free labor for everybody. But if you say, hey, I joined whatever association, they did a background check, and now I can be authorized to work in any of the countries that are in the North American Union, that would be a great thing. And a lot of these countries already, Panama, Cuba, and Jamaica, and Haiti, maybe Dominican Republic as well, Barbados and Dominica, they already use the United States dollar. They already use the U.S. dollar. So it makes sense to basically create an economic bloc. And with proliferation of the United States dollar, that could mean we could experience some deflation, which I have a plan for that as well. I'll get into lastly in a second, which is kind of the penultimate thing I've been getting to in all of this. But the idea with the North American Union is that if everybody's kind of using the U.S. dollar, they can still use their own currency. And the United States says, hey, we're going to guarantee you guys security agreements. You don't have to spend as much on your military. Instead, if you would decide, you can subsidize the American military, and we'll be there instead. We obviously have the best military. We have higher capability. And if it was within our sphere of influence already, being in North America, we want to make sure these countries are safe. If they're now basically working in tandem with the United States economy, it makes even more sense to want to protect these countries and do right by them. And this goes even deeper. I'll only mention this very briefly. There's been a lot of problems with Haiti. They've had issues with their government and being able to control the violent groups that they have in their country. Some gangs have been able to take over parts and occupy territory that the government does not have the resources to overtake. The United States military has had to come in on multiple occasions with coalitions of other countries and reinstate order and reinstate the government. And so I think by nature of them not having the resources they have, being in the United States field of or sphere of influence, I think we should help them. And I think it would be mutually beneficial. For the U.S. dollar, it would be great because, we need to do something, because something I didn't mention was the problem of the U.S. having this gigantic debt, taking on more debt irresponsibly, and also being the global reserve currency. Guess what happens if nobody thinks the United States is going to pay their debt? The U.S. dollar becomes very worthless, and then they think, wait a second, why don't we use something different? And then, perhaps we'll talk about the global reserve currency in another video. I didn't want this video to go on too long, but I do want to wrap it up with this last thing here. The biggest solution to all of this, outside of electing officials that will not borrow, that will not have irresponsible debt policies, and that will commit to repaying the debt, paying down the debt, is by backing the U.S. currency with something, with anything. Commodity-backed U.S. dollar. Like back in 1971, we were on the gold standard. We were on the gold standard for a long time. And at that time, the U.S. the U.S. dollar was the global reserve currency, as it still is today. And it was after World War II that the United States basically went through all these countries and they said these things. They said these things. Sorry, my tone is wrong. They said these things. One, every country on the planet that has a currency, its currency can be backed by U.S. dollars. And the US dollar itself is then backed by gold. And we had basically all the gold in the world. Not really. We had like 70% of the gold reserves in the world in the United States after World War II. Because countries need to pay back their debt, or we just, I won't really get into exactly how we claimed all of our gold, but countries had to pay back their debt, or that we got their gold because they needed loans, or they needed money to rebuild their countries after World War II. But then after we got off the gold standard, I think it was France was the first country sometime in the 80s that said, wait a second, if the U.S. is just printing more money and the gold that you have is not backing any currency, then I want France's gold back. And France came and they got all their gold back. And then other countries in Europe said, France, you're right. That's a great idea. If the U.S. currency is no longer backed by gold commodities, then I want my gold back. And they went and did the same thing. And now, I'm going to look it up right now. I should have done this earlier. How much? Oh, I can't. That's okay. I'll put a note here. This is what I was going to say earlier. Right here. This is how much gold the United States has in its possession now. And there was a gold run, basically where countries came and they reclaimed their gold after the United States took the U.S. dollar off the gold standard. So what would I do? The reason that this is important, like I said, for the national debt is because that if you are the global reserve currency, every dollar that you issue for other countries to have eventually will find its way back into your economy. So if the United States, the way that it works with the petrodollar system, which is something, again, I'd have to explain in another video. We'll probably talk about the petrodollar system and the global reserve currency in a future video. I think that's going to be something that people might want to hear about. But basically the way it works is the United States says, buy oil in US dollars. If you do that, you get favorable trading privileges, and it's easier for countries because it's just one unified currency. India's not going and saying, hey, I can't buy oil from another country because their currency won't accept my currency. They take US dollars. And so that's why it's beneficial. Every country on the planet, for the most, I would say every country, has a reserve of US dollars so that they can use them for things like buying oil or whatever else. It simplifies the process. However, if countries don't think the United States is going to be able to succeed financially, or that it's going to have problems in the financial market, they'll ditch the dollar and they'll replace it with something. So then every time the United States now goes to another country, it might have to convert its currency to be able to use it. And that's a terrible thing because the average American definitely doesn't feel the benefits and privileges of having the US dollar as the global reserve currency. But I will tell you what, we will certainly feel it when it goes away. So I think a commodity-backed U.S. dollar, like back in 1971, the reason that was a problem because we wanted to print money, we'd have to mine gold and say, okay, we mined $100 million worth of gold. We can now print $100 million. That's a hard thing to do. But with asteroid mining, there's an incredible, vast wealth of resources in outer space that we could bring to Earth. And it would be very easy to not just say that gold could be a backed security, but all rare earth minerals could be the commodity that backs our currency. And that's something that even in 100 years' time, we can expect that rare earth minerals are still going to be useful because they're on the bleeding edge of our technological advancements today. AI systems and computer chips and superconductors and all this technology that we're still working in redefining and integrating into our lifestyles and societies today, they all use rare earth minerals or rare earth metals. So why not use those to back the U.S. The U.S. dollar, like we did in 1971, to ensure that countries still want to play with the United States dollar, to ensure that countries still have to use the U.S. dollar, and if we're doing asteroid mining, it would guarantee, if we implement our space commerce tax, that we're paying back the national debt by enriching ourselves from space. So this is my plan. If you guys think this is a good idea or that I should talk more about stuff like this, I really appreciate it if you guys would comment below and give me a little feedback. If I do seem a little bit more excited, I did do a lot of research for this. I spent most of today getting everything together, and I've been talking to people and whatever groups and everywhere I could find. It just, a lot of people aren't super sold on the asteroid mining thing yet. I get it. Scientific communities are like, yeah, that's pie in the sky. I get it, guys. But you have to remember, my plan is to be president in 15 years. So in 15 years, if we get our ducks in a row, if I'm the right advocate, and if you guys think I'm the right guy for the job, I think I can get these things done. So comment below if you guys have any more questions for me. I'll even have you on and we can live debate if you think I'm a big idiot and everything I talked about today was just phooey. But if that's truly how you feel, I don't know, just leave me a comment. We can talk then. Thank you very much, everybody else, for watching for today. I do appreciate it as always. I will see you guys again very soon, I'm sure. And you guys can check me out on Shorts on YouTube for any of the stock reviews. I'll be posting another one as soon as I'm done with this today. So, thank you very much for watching as always. Adios, mis muchachos. And peace out.